They told her the wolf inside her had died. 5 winters of ash. 5 winters of scrubbing floors that bore her own family's name. Long enough for a girl to start believing the lie. Tonight, the drums were calling. She pressed her palm flat against the cold iron of the cellar door, the door her stepmother had locked from the outside. Beyond it, the whole valley was burning bright with bonfires. Out there, under a full and silver moon, a king had come hunting for the one woman fate had carved out just for him. And she was down here, in the dark, with the rats and the salted meat. Her stepmother had a daughter she wanted on that throne, a pretty painted thing, so the rightful heir got a padlock and a warning: stay buried or burn. But something was waking now, low in her chest, a growl that did not belong to a servant. She closed her eyes. She thought of her mother's torn gown, of every name they had spat at her, of every time she had lowered her eyes and swallowed the fire. Not tonight. Tonight, the girl they had left for dead was going to walk straight into that festival, and the moon was going to see exactly who she was. The lock had not moved in hours. Wren Calloway pressed her forehead against the cold cellar door and listened to a world that was happening without her. Drums, far off, but steady. The kind of rhythm that crawled up through the dirt floor and into the soles of her feet. The kind that woke something old and aching in her chest. The moon festival had begun, and she was buried beneath her own family's house, surrounded by sacks of grain and the sour smell of salted meat. She breathed in slowly, damp earth, tallow, the faint copper bite of the iron padlock pressing against her cheek. 5 winters she had lived down here, or in rooms just like it. 5 winters since the night her father rode out and never came home, and the woman he had married smiled at the news in a way no widow should. Delia Crane. Even thinking the name made the soot on Wren's hands feel heavier. She looked down at those hands now, cracked across the knuckles, stained gray from the hearths she scrubbed before dawn, and the lie that ate at her skin. These were not the hands of a girl who had once been called heir. They were the hands Delia had made for her. "You are nothing but ash now," her stepmother liked to say, soft as silk. "Ash does not get a name." Tonight, that ash was supposed to stay locked away, because tonight a king had come. The whole valley knew it. A sovereign of the wolf packs, riding in from the cold reaches beyond the ridge, hunting for the one woman fate had set aside for him, his Luna, his equal. A queen for a throne carved out of stone and winter. And Delia wanted that throne for her own daughter, Sabrina. Pretty, painted Sabrina, who laughed too loud and smelled of borrowed perfume. So the rightful heir got a padlock and a promise. "If you so much as breathe near that festival," Delia had whispered through the door, "I will burn this whole wing to the ground. Your mother's things, her gown, her memory, all of it. Do you understand me, girl?" Wren had not answered. She had only listened to those heels click away across the stone, and then she had sat down in the dark to wait for a life that kept getting smaller. But something was different tonight. The drums. They reached into a place inside her that Delia had never managed to lock. A low, restless heat, a pacing thing behind her ribs that she had almost forgotten she carried. Her wolf. They had told her it was dead, starved out of her, beaten down so far it would never rise again. Tonight it lifted its head, and it wanted out. A sound on the steps. Wren froze, not heels. Something slower. The soft tap of a cane finding each stone, careful and unhurried. The padlock rattled, clicked, fell open with a tired groan of metal that had not turned in far too long. The door swung wide. An old woman stood there, no taller than a child, wrapped in layers of gray wool. Her eyes were clouded over, pale as river ice, and yet they found Wren in the dark as if she had no trouble seeing at all. Marin. The pack had always whispered about her. The one who read the moon. The one even Delia would not dare touch. Tears waste water, child, Marin said. Her voice was dry as old leaves. And the moon has little patience for those who weep in cellars. Wren wiped her face with the back of one filthy hand. The door was locked. There is only one key. The old woman gave a low, crackling laugh and tucked something thin and bent back into her sleeve. Locks are for people with no imagination. She lifted a heavy bundle from beneath her cloak and held it out. Take this, quickly. We do not have long. Wren hesitated. Then she reached out, and the fabric spilled into her arms like something alive. It was a cloak, dark as a moonless sky, soft as breath, lined in fur the color of fresh snow. Along its edges ran threads of silver, stitched into shapes Wren did not know but somehow felt, the way you feel a word on the tip of your tongue. The moment it touched her skin, warmth rushed through her, real warmth, down into her cold fingers, into the hollow places where she had been empty for years. What is this? She breathed. Old, Marin said simply. Older than your stepmother's lies. It belonged to the first Luna of your line, long before that woman ever clawed her way into this house and tried to throw it on the fire. I pulled it out of the ashes myself. She pressed it closer. It will hide what you carry, your scent, your blood. To every common wolf out there tonight, you will be no one at all. Marin leaned close. Her clouded eyes seemed to look straight through to the marrow. But to the right one, it will hide nothing. Remember that. She pressed a gnarled hand to Wren's shoulder. The grip was startling, strong as roots. Go. Stay to the shadows by the old stones. Let the moon do the rest. This is your part, child, not mine. And then, the way she had come, she was gone. A soft tapping fading up the steps. Wren stood alone in the dark with the cloak around her shoulders, and her heart slamming against her ribs. She thought of Delia's threat, the fire, her mother's gown, already torn to ribbons in front of her own eyes. She thought, and then she stopped thinking. She drew the hood up over her ashen hair, and she stepped out into the night. The forest swallowed her whole. Cold air rushed against her face, sharp with pine and wood smoke and something sweeter underneath. The drums grew louder with every step. Her bare feet found the moss without sound, and for the first time in 5 years, her body moved the way it was meant to. Quiet, certain, free. When the trees finally opened, the sight stole the breath right out of her. Hundreds of them, wolves in human skin, dancing in the light of bonfires that threw sparks high into a sky thick with stars. The whole clearing pulsed with heat and music and the heavy musk of so many bodies gathered in one place. And there, raised above it all on a platform draped in black and gold, sat Delia and Sabrina, glittering like they had already won. Wren pressed herself against the cold face of an ancient standing stone and made herself small. Watch, she told herself. Just watch. Stay hidden. She did not see the king arrive. She felt him. A horn split the night. The drums fell silent, and a pressure rolled across the clearing like a wave, an unseen weight that drove weaker wolves to their knees with their throats bared to the sky. Wren felt it push against her too, but she did not bow. Something in her old blood held her upright, trembling, against a stone in the dark. He came out of the tree line like the night had decided to take shape, tall, broad through the shoulders, moving with the slow, unhurried menace of something that had never once needed to hurry. Firelight caught the hard line of his jaw, the pale ice of his eyes. Eyes that swept across the crowd and found everyone wanting Roman Vale, the king. And inside that king, a wolf that had slept through years of empty faces and emptier nights, stirred for no reason he could name. He did not want to be here. He never did. Another clearing, another parade of daughters dressed up like offerings, drenched in perfume, meant to mimic something they did not have. His own father had drowned in a bond once, gone mad chasing a fate that ruined him. Roman had decided long ago that he would feel nothing. He took a breath out of pure habit, smoke, roast meat, fear, the cloying sweetness of 100 women trying too hard. Then the wind shifted. It came down off the falls, cool and clean, and it carried something underneath all that noise. Rain on warm earth, crushed lavender, and beneath it, buried deep, the unmistakable steel of true alpha blood. The breath caught hard in his chest. His wolf came awake all at once, slamming against the inside of his mind with a force that nearly drove him to his knees. Mine. His eyes flared bright. His pulse roared. Slowly, he turned his head away from the dais, away from the glittering women and the painted smiles, toward the dark edge of the clearing, toward the shadows of the ancient stones, where a girl in a cloak of midnight stood frozen, watching him watch her, and the whole festival seemed to hold its breath. For one long heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them. Wren could not move. 50 paces of firelight and dancing bodies separated her from the king, and yet she felt his stare land on her skin like a hand pressed flat against her chest. The cloak was supposed to hide her. Marin had promised. To every common wolf in this clearing she was no one. A shadow against the stones. But he saw her. He saw straight through the dark wool and the silver runes and the years of ash, and his pale eyes burned brighter the longer he looked. Run, something in her whispered. Stay, said something deeper. She did neither. She simply stood there, trembling, while a sleeping thing inside her lifted its head and answered a call she did not understand. Roman Vale began to walk. He did not ask the crowd to part. He did not need to. Wolves scrambled out of his path, stumbling over one another, some dropping low with their throats bared. He moved through them like water through stone, and his gaze never once left the girl by the ancient markers. On the platform, Delia Crane felt the change in the air before she understood it. The king had been walking toward her daughter. She was sure of it. She had arranged every detail, the gold silk, the perfume, the careful angle of Sabrina's chin. And now his back was to them. Now he was striding toward the tree line, toward the dark, toward nothing, toward something. Delia's eyes followed that line of sight, and the color drained out of her painted face. No, she breathed, because she knew that cloak. She had thrown that cloak away years ago. Onto the fire, she had thought, with her own 2 hands. And yet, here it was, alive again in the dark, and she knew, with the cold certainty of a woman who had built her whole life on lies, exactly who would be standing inside it. Mother. Sabrina's voice cracked with humiliation. Mother, what is he doing? Everyone is watching. Delia did not answer. She was already lifting her heavy skirts, already moving down the steps, already calculating how to crush this before it could draw a single breath. Wren saw her coming. She saw her stepmother sweep down off the platform like a storm front, and every old instinct in her body screamed at her to lower her eyes and shrink. She had survived 5 years by making herself small, but the king was closer now, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him, close enough that the wind carried his scent to her, cedar and cold steel and something darker underneath. Something that made the breath stutter in her throat. Her wolf pressed hard against her ribs. And then Delia was there. Your Majesty, stop. Delia's voice rang out shrill across the clearing, sharp enough to cut through the silence. She threw herself between them, one hand flung out toward Wren as if to ward off something filthy. Do not go near her, my king. I beg you. That creature is a servant, a scullery maid. She scrubs the kennels and steals from her betters. Her fingers stab the air, trembling with manufactured outrage. She is wearing a stolen relic, a sacred heirloom of this house. Guards, guards, seize the thief. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Several of Delia's loyal men stepped forward, hands going to their blades, moving to drag the girl in the cloak out of the shadows and into the dirt where she belonged. Wren's heart slammed. This was the moment she had always lost, the moment where Delia spoke and the world believed her, where Ash had no name and no voice, and no one to stand at its side. She braced for it, but it did not come. A sound tore through the clearing, low, guttural, rising up from the king's chest like the growl of something far older than the man who carried it. It rolled out across the bonfires and the standing stones, and it carried a weight that bent the spine of every wolf who heard it. The guards froze. Then they dropped, weapons falling from their fingers, knees hitting the earth, hands clamping over their ears as if the sound alone could break them. Roman did not look at them. He turned his head slowly and fixed Delia Crane in the full light of those pale and murderous eyes. If any man lays a hand on her, he said, and his voice was quiet now, which was somehow worse, I will hang what is left of him from the gates of my own house. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the bonfires crackling, the distant rush of the falls, the ragged sound of Delia trying to breathe. Her mouth opened, closed. No sound came out, and Roman turned away from her as if she were nothing at all, as if she had never spoken, and he closed the last few steps to the girl in the cloak. Up close, the scent of her nearly undid him. Rain on warm earth. Lavender, crushed and sweet. And beneath it, that thread of pure, unbroken alpha blood that his wolf had been clawing toward since the wind first shifted. Roman Vale had spent his whole life keeping the world at arm's length. He had watched a bond hollow out his own father, watched a strong man rot from the inside, chasing a fate he could not control. Roman had sworn it would never happen to him. He had built walls so high that nothing reached him anymore. Not faces, not flattery, not the endless parade of daughters dressed up like prizes. And now one breath of wind had brought every wall crashing down. He hated it. Some cold, careful part of him stood back and watched himself move toward her and hated every step. And still he could not stop. He stopped close, closer than was proper, so close that the hem of her oversized cloak nearly brushed his boots. "Take down your hood," he said. It was not the voice he used with lords and ladies. That voice was ice. This one was rough at the edges, low, thick with something he did not have a name for. Wren lifted her hands. They were shaking. She hated that they were shaking, hated that he could surely see the cracked gray skin and the burns and the years of labor written across her knuckles. She caught the silver clasp at her throat, and she pushed the hood back. Moonlight poured over her face. She braced for his disgust. She knew what he would see. Soot smudged across one cheek, hair tangled and dull, the torn hem of a servant's dress just visible beneath the borrowed cloak. She had spent 5 years being looked at like something that needed to be scrubbed off the floor. She lifted her chin anyway. Let him look. Let him see the ash. She was done flinching first. But Roman did not see the ash. He saw eyes the color of warm amber, glowing faintly in the dark, fierce and frightened and utterly alive. He felt the raw power humming off her spirit, power that no amount of dirt could bury. He felt his wolf go still and certain in a way it had not been in years. "There you are," the beast seemed to sigh. "There you are." "You are no servant," Roman said. His voice carried. He meant it to. Every lord, every lady, every wolf in that silent clearing heard him. He reached up and pulled the heavy iron gauntlet from his right hand, let it fall to the moss with a dull and final thud. Then, slowly, he reached out. Wren stopped breathing. His fingers closed around hers, around the cracked skin and the burns and the ash, around the very hand her stepmother had spent years trying to ruin. And the moment they touched, the world lit up. A current ran between them, bright and electric, racing up her arm and into her chest and down to the soles of her feet. The torches nearest them flared, throwing sparks into the air. Wren gasped. Her whole body sang with it, every starved and frozen part of her flooding suddenly with warmth. Her wolf threw back its head inside her and howled. Roman felt it too, the bond snapping taut between them like a tether drawn from his ribs to hers. It poured into him, soothing the jagged edges he had carried so long he had forgotten they were there. For one moment, the careful king forgot to be afraid. He raised her hand. He turned it over in his own, studying the worn and damaged skin as if it were the most precious thing he had ever held. And then he bent his head, and he pressed his lips to her soot-stained knuckles. A sound moved through the crowd, a collective intake of breath. A king, bowing his mouth to the hand of a girl they had all watched be called a thief. Wren felt his lips against her ruined skin, and something inside her cracked wide open. Not breaking. The opposite of breaking. Some door she had nailed shut years ago swung loose, and light came pouring in, and she did not know whether she wanted to laugh or weep. You are my mate, Roman said. He lifted his eyes to hers and held them, and the whole clearing fell away. And you will be the Queen of the North. The words landed like thunder, gasps, murmurs, the shuffle of 100 wolves trying to understand what they had just witnessed. On the steps, Delia Crane stood frozen, her face the color of old bone. Beside her, Sabrina had begun to cry, ugly and loud, her gold silk suddenly looking cheap in the firelight. Wren barely heard any of it. She was looking up into the face of a king who held her hand like it mattered, and for the first time in 5 years, she did not feel like Ash. She felt seen, and it terrified her almost as much as it healed her. But the king had already begun to retreat behind his own eyes. Because the moment the words left his mouth, the moment the bond sang through him, sweet and total and undeniable, the old fear came rushing back in behind it. This is how it starts. He had watched it before. A scent, a pull, a certainty that could not be argued with. And then a strong man unmade, ruled by a fate he never chose, until there was nothing left of him but want. Roman looked down at this girl, this fierce and ruined and luminous girl, and he felt his wolf bending toward her like a flower toward the sun, and a cold voice in the back of his skull said, "Careful." He had claimed her. He had to. He could not stand in front of his court and let them watch a king ruled by a scent he could not name. Better to call it a choice. Better to call it a decree. But somewhere behind the public crown, a private wall went up, brick by careful brick. He would protect her. He would honor the bond. He would not let it own him. He would not become his father. Wren did not see the wall. Not yet. She saw only the way his hand tightened around hers, steady and warm, as he turned to face the silent clearing. "This woman is under my protection," Roman announced, and his voice rang out cold and absolute, a sovereign once more. "From this night forward, any hand raised against her is a hand raised against the crown. Any word spoken against her will be answered by me." His pale gaze swept across the crowd and came to rest at last on Delia Crane. "And there will be a reckoning," he said softly, "for what was done in this house." Delia sank into a curtsy so deep her chin nearly touched the boards. It was not respect. It was terror wearing the mask of respect. Wren watched her stepmother bow, the woman who had locked her in the dark, who had torn her mother's gown to shreds, who had spent 5 years telling her she was nothing. Ash, a ghost with no name, bowing to her. And the strangest feeling moved through Wren in that moment. Not triumph, not yet. Something quieter and far more dangerous. The first faint memory of who she used to be. Around her, the festival had gone utterly still. The bonfires burned. The moon hung huge and silver above the falls. And 100 wolves stared at the ash-covered girl the king had chosen, and not one of them dared make a sound. Roman leaned close. His breath stirred the hair at her temple, and his low voice was meant for her alone. "You are trembling," he murmured. "I am not afraid," Wren whispered back. It was almost true. His mouth curved, the faintest ghost of something that was not quite a smile. "Good," he said. "You will need that." He did not let go of her hand, not as the crowd began, slowly, to bow. Not as Delia and Sabrina shrank back into the shadows of the platform. Not as the drums, somewhere far off, began again, low and uncertain, as if even the festival itself did not quite know what had happened here tonight. Wren stood in the center of it all, ash on her face and a king at her side, feeling the bond hum warm and bright between their joined hands. She did not know about the wall he was building behind his eyes. She did not know how far the north was, or how cold, or what waited for her in a court full of strangers who would take one look at her servant's hands and decide she did not belong. She did not know that her stepmother, even now, was already beginning to plan. She knew only this. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was not alone in the dark, and the moon, hanging full and bright above them all, had seen exactly who she was. They left before the sun had fully cleared the ridge. Wren sat wrapped in furs inside the king's carriage, and she could not stop touching them. Soft, warm, real. For 5 years her fingers had known only lye and cold stone, and the rough weave of a servant's dress. Now they moved across marten fur and fine wool as if they did not quite believe it, and a part of her kept waiting to wake up on the floor of the root cellar with the rats and the dark. Across from her sat Roman Vale. He had not said more than a handful of words since they rolled through the gates of her old home. He sat with his broad shoulders against the leather, his pale eyes fixed on the passing trees, and the silence between them had grown so thick she could almost taste it. She studied him when she was sure he was not looking, the hard line of his jaw, the faint scar that ran along it, pale against weathered skin, the way his hands rested loose on his knees, large and scarred and capable of terrible things, hands that had bowed to her own only the night before. She did not understand him. Last night he had pressed his mouth to her ruined knuckles in front of 100 wolves and called her his queen. This morning he sat across from her like a stranger sharing a coach, polite and distant and walled off behind those cold eyes. She did not know what she had done. She did not yet understand that she had done nothing at all. "You keep watching me," Roman said. His voice broke the quiet so suddenly that she startled. "I apologize, Your Majesty." She dropped her gaze to her lap at once. Old habit, the reflex of years. "I did not mean to stare." Something flickered across his face. He did not like the way she had said it, the smallness of it, the bowed head. "You flinch," he said, "when you speak to me." It was not a question. Wren said nothing. Outside, the rolling hills of her homeland began, slowly, to give way to harder country. The trees grew darker and taller. The air that slipped through the carriage seams turned sharp and clean and cold, scented with pine and stone, and the distant promise of snow. "Where we are going," Roman said after a long while, "is not a gentle place." She looked up. The lords of the north respect 2 things. He held up one finger. Strength. A second. And resolve. They will look at you, Wren Calloway, and they will see a girl from the soft southern valleys. They will hear that you scrubbed floors, and they will decide, before you have said a single word, that you do not belong among them. "Then I will change their minds," she said. The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile, gone before it formed. Spoken like someone who has never met them. The days bled into one another. They traveled through a country that grew wilder with every passing mile. Jagged peaks rose around them, capped white. Deep valleys filled with mist that never quite lifted. The cold sank into Wren's bones and stayed there, and yet there was a beauty to it, a fierce and lonely beauty that stirred something in her chest she could not name. At night, they made camp. The royal guards kept their distance, dark shapes at the edge of the firelight, and the commander named Cain watched everything with hard and careful eyes, and slowly, by the fire, the wall between them began to thin. It happened in pieces. A question here, an answer there. The careful, halting way two people who have both been hurt begin to circle one another, testing the ground, waiting to be wounded. "Tell me about your father," Roman said one night. The fire snapped between them. Sparks rose into a sky thick with stars. Wren wrapped her hands around a cup of something warm and stared into the flames. "He was kind," she said softly. "Everyone says that about the dead, I know, but he truly was. He used to carry me on his shoulders through the high meadows when the moon was full. He said the wolf in me was strong, stronger than his even." Her voice caught. "He said one day the whole valley would follow me. And then he died." "And then he died," she swallowed. "On the border. They called it a skirmish. Rogues, they said. But the woman he had married smiled at the news. And I was a child. And no one listened to a child." Roman went very still across the fire. "You believe she had a hand in it?" "I believe," Wren said carefully, "that I will never be able to prove what I know." The fire popped. Somewhere out in the dark, a night bird called and was answered. "After that," she went on, quieter now, "there was no one to listen at all. She took my name, my rooms, my place at the table. She gave it all to her daughter, piece by piece, and she put me in the kitchens, and she told me." Wren stopped. "What did she tell you?" Roman asked. "That I was ash." The word came out flat, worn smooth from years of handling. "That ash does not get a name. That my wolf had withered and died inside me from the cold and the dark, and that no king would ever look twice at a stray with empty hands." She looked up at him then, and the firelight caught the shine in her amber eyes. "For a long time," she whispered, "I believed her." Roman did not speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was rougher than before. "She was wrong about the king," he said. And he looked at her in a way that made the breath go thin in her chest, and then, as if he had caught himself reaching for something forbidden, he looked away. The wall went back up. Wren felt it happen. She did not understand it, but she felt it, the way you feel a cloud pass over the sun. The nights grew colder. The road climbed higher. And one evening, camped beside a frozen lake that lay still and black under the moon, it was Roman who spoke first. "You asked once why I keep my distance." Wren turned toward him. She had not asked, not out loud, but she did not correct him. He was staring into the fire, and his face in the orange light looked older than his years. "My father was a powerful man," he said. "Feared, respected, the kind of alpha the North bends the knee to without being told." He paused. And then he found his fate, his mate. The bond took him the way a flood takes a valley, all at once, total. His jaw tightened. At first it looked like a gift. He softened. He smiled. And then, Roman shook his head slowly. Then she was all he could see. The pack starved while he doted. Enemies gathered at the borders while he wrote her poems. When she fell ill, he fell apart. And when she died, What was left of him was not a king at all, just a hollow thing that wore his face, ruled by a bond that had already taken everything he was. The fire crackled. He drove this kingdom to the edge of ruin, Roman said quietly. It took me years to pull it back, years of blood. I swore, when I took the crown, that I would never let a scent decide my fate, that I would feel nothing I did not choose to feel. He finally looked at her, and then the wind shifted at a festival I did not want to attend, he said, and there you were. Ren's heart was pounding. You think the bond will make you weak, she said. I think the bond already has. His voice was low and raw. I look at you, and my wolf does not care about the North, or the throne, or the wars I have left to fight. It cares about one thing, you, and that. He exhaled. That is exactly how it began for him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. And then Ren did something she had not allowed herself in 5 years. She reached out, slowly, across the small space between them. Her cracked and healing fingers found the back of his scarred hand where it rested on his knee, and she laid them there, light as breath. The bond flared at the touch, warm, bright. A current that ran up both their arms and made the fire seem to lean toward them. Roman went rigid. I am not her, Ren said softly, and you are not him. You feel the bond. So do I. But feeling is not the same as drowning, Roman. A man who is afraid of the water can still learn to swim. His hand turned beneath hers. For one breathless moment, his fingers closed around hers, and he looked at her mouth, and the space between them seemed to vanish, and Ren felt the whole world tilt toward something she had no name for. And then he pulled back. He stood, abruptly. The cold rushed in to fill the space where his warmth had been. It is late, he said. His voice had gone flat again. Careful. The wall, rising. You should rest. We reach the citadel in a few days, and you will need your strength. Ren sat by the dying fire and watched him walk to the edge of the camp, his back to her, his shoulders set against something she could not see. She did not feel rejected. That surprised her. She felt instead like a woman who had glimpsed a wounded animal in the brush and understood suddenly why it would not come to her hand. He was not cold. He was afraid. And Ren Calloway, who had spent 5 years being afraid in the dark, knew exactly how long it took to learn to trust the light. The next day, the shadow she had been carrying finally caught up with her. They had stopped to water the horses at a stream half frozen at its edges. Kane and the guards moved about their work, and Roman stood a little apart, scanning the ridgeline out of habit. Ren wandered to the water alone. She knelt at the bank and looked down at her reflection in the dark, moving water. And the wolf inside her stirred. It had been stirring for days, since the festival, since his hand had closed around hers. She could feel it pacing behind her ribs, restless, wanting. She closed her eyes. Come on, she thought. Come on. Show me you are still here. She reached for it, the way her father had taught her long ago, before the dark and the cold, and the years of being told she was empty. She reached for the shift, and she felt the wolf rise toward the surface, and then slam, hard, into a wall. Pain lanced through her. She gasped and pitched forward, catching herself on her hands in the frozen mud. Her whole body shook. The wolf threw itself against the barrier inside her, again and again, frantic, and could not break through. It was still caged. 5 years of starvation. 5 years of dark. The trauma had built walls inside her, that no amount of warmth or wanting could tear down, and the beast that should have been her birthright was trapped behind them, howling, unable to reach the moon. Ren! Roman was beside her in an instant. His hands found her shoulders, steadying her, and the bond poured warmth into her trembling body. What happened? Are you hurt? I tried to shift. The words came out broken, ashamed. I tried and I cannot. It is still there. I can feel her, but there is a wall, and I cannot. She could not finish. The shame of it closed her throat. Because this was the truth Delia had buried in her like a splinter. A wolf who could not shift was not a true wolf at all. A Luna who could not shift, could not lead the hunt, could not defend the pack, could not stand among the strong as an equal. She was about to walk into a court that respected only strength, and her strength was locked away where she could not reach it. They will know, she whispered, the lords of the north. The moment they see I cannot shift, they will know, and they will say your stepmother was right. They will say I am broken. They will say I bewitched you. Roman crouched in front of her in the half-frozen mud, a king kneeling at the edge of a nameless stream, and he took her face in his scarred hands and made her look at him. Listen to me, he said. His voice had lost its wall entirely. There was only the man now, low and fierce. You have lived through 5 years that would have killed most wolves twice over. They starved your beast. They locked her in the dark. They tried to break her so badly that she learned to hide just to survive. And she did survive, Ren. She is still there. You said so yourself. You feel her. But I cannot reach her. Not yet. His thumb brushed across the soot that no longer marked her cheek, an old gesture, a tender one. A wolf that has been caged for years does not come out the moment the door opens. She comes out when she finally believes it is safe. You cannot force her. You cannot order her. You can only build a place worth coming back to. Ren stared at him. No one had ever said such a thing to her. The lords will measure you by whether you can shift on command, Roman went on. They are fools, every one of them. Strength was never about the shape you wear when you are told to wear it. His pale eyes held hers, burning. Real strength is this, sitting in the mud after everything they did to you, and still refusing to believe you are nothing. Real strength is not letting them tell you what you are worth. Something cracked open in Ren's chest. Not the wall around her wolf. Not yet. Something else. Something just as long sealed shut. For 5 years, she had believed her worth was a thing other people decided. Delia decided she was Ash. The court would decide she was a fraud. Even Roman, she had feared, would one day decide she was a mistake. And now this fearsome, walled-off king was crouched in the frozen mud, telling her that her worth was hers, that no one else got to name it, that the shift would come not when she was forced, but when she finally felt safe enough to let it. Why? She whispered. Why do you say these things to me, and then build a wall every time I get close? Roman went still. For a long moment he did not answer. Then, very quietly, he said, Because the wall is not to keep you out, Ren. He rose. He drew her up with him, his hands warm and certain around her cold ones. It is to keep me from drowning, he said, and every day I am with you, I find I care a little less about staying dry. He did not kiss her. He simply held her hands a moment longer than he needed to, there at the edge of the frozen water, while the guards pretended not to watch, and the wind came down off the white peaks ahead. And then he let go, and helped her to her feet, and the journey went on. But something had changed. The wall was still there. So was the cage around her wolf. So was the cold court waiting at the end of the road, full of strangers who would take one look at her hands and decide she did not belong. But for the first time, Wren Calloway carried a different idea inside her than the one Delia had planted. The idea that her worth had never belonged to anyone else, that it had been hers all along. And somewhere behind its wall, deep in the dark, her wolf lifted its head and listened. The citadel rose out of the mountain like something the mountain had grown on purpose. Dark stone, towers that climbed until they vanished into low cloud, iron gates tall enough to swallow the carriage whole. Banners of black and gold cracked in a wind that never seemed to rest. And as Wren stepped down into the courtyard, that wind found every gap in her furs and reminded her exactly how far she was from home. She had thought the festival crowd had stared. This was worse. Word had run ahead of them. It always did. By the time the great doors of the hall opened, every lord and lady of the north already knew the story. The king had come home from the soft southern valleys with a servant girl on his arm and a crown in his eyes. They lined the hall in their heavy winter silks to see her for themselves, and they watched her walk past with faces carved from the same cold stone as the walls. They bowed to their king. Of course they did. But their gazes slid sideways to her slight frame, to the hands she could not quite stop twisting in front of her, and Wren could read every thought as clearly as if it had been spoken aloud. This is the one he chose, this thin, ashen, southern thing. Roman walked beside her, tall and remote, and every inch a sovereign, and the warmth of the man who had knelt in the frozen mud beside a nameless stream was nowhere to be found. Here he was the king, and the king kept his wall high. She understood why. She even agreed with it. A court like this would devour any sign of softness between them, but understanding did not make the cold of it hurt any less. They installed her in a suite of rooms grander than anything she had slept in since childhood. Thick furs, woven tapestries that told old stories in thread, a hearth large enough to stand inside, an army of servants who curtsied low and would not, dared not, meet her eyes. And in command of them all stood a woman built like a fortress door, Mistress Halla. Iron gray hair scraped back so tight it pulled at her temples, a mouth that looked as though it had never once bent into a smile. She inspected Wren the way a quartermaster inspects a questionable shipment, walking a slow circle around her, and her first words were not kind. "You are smaller than they said," Halla announced, "and thinner, and paler. The court will eat you alive by week's end, and then where will I be, having wasted good linens on you?" Wren could have wilted. The old Wren would have. She would have dropped her eyes and murmured an apology and made herself small enough to slip through the cracks in the floor. Instead, she stood very straight, looked the formidable woman dead in the eye, and said, "Then it is fortunate I have spent 5 years learning to survive on very little, mistress. I will not be much trouble to feed." For one long beat, Halla said nothing. Her gray eyes narrowed. They moved over Wren's face, over the worn knuckles, over the spine she refused to bend. And something shifted there. Not warmth. Not yet. But the first grudging flicker of respect. The look of a hard woman recognizing hardness in someone she had already written off. Said Hala. It was, Wren would learn, the very highest praise the matron ever gave. That was the first. Wren did not win the North with speeches. She had no army, no allies, no title these lords respected, no proud lineage they would bend to, no wolf she could call up out of her own skin to prove the blood that ran in her veins. She had only herself, so she used herself, quietly, day by day. When a young serving girl dropped a heavy tray in the corridor and went white as snow, flinching, bracing for the blow she clearly expected. Wren knelt down on the cold stone in her fine new gown and gathered the broken shards with her own scarred hands. "It is only a cup," she told the trembling girl gently. "No cup in this house is worth your fear. Go on. I will say, I dropped it myself." The girl stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign tongue. She told the other servants. The servants began, slowly, hesitantly, to lift their eyes when Wren passed. It was not much, but it was something. And in a place that cold, something was afire. When the old elder named Thorn tested her at supper, the oldest and most skeptical man on the king's council, he did it with a question sharp as a blade about the failing southern trade routes and who was to blame for them. Wren did not bluster. She answered plainly. She admitted what she did not know. And then she asked him a question of her own, about the old border wars of the North. And she listened to his answer as if it were the most fascinating thing she had ever heard, which, to her surprise, it nearly was. Thorn was a man who had spent 40 winters being feared, flattered, and worked around. He had forgotten entirely what it felt like to simply be listened to. "You are not what I expected, girl," he admitted when the plates were cleared. "Few of us ever are," Wren said. The old man almost smiled into his cup. It was slow work, lonely work. For every small victory, there were a dozen cold shoulders, a dozen whispered cruelties she was meant to overhear. A dozen nights she lay awake in that grand cold bed and felt the distance of the man sleeping in the chamber beyond her wall. And presiding over all of it, like frost spreading across a window pane, was Lady Cassia Frost. Cassia was everything the North prized and Wren was not. Tall, pale, beautiful in a way that did not warm a room but cooled it. Her wolf was said to be among the fiercest in the territory, and for years she had believed, with the absolute certainty of a woman who has never been told no, that the empty throne beside the king would one day be hers. She had not counted on a girl from the soft south with ash beneath her fingernails. She watched Wren with a cold and patient hatred, the way a hawk watches a field. And she was waiting, only waiting, for the right moment to strike. That moment came at a banquet. The great hall was full that night, the air thick with roast and spiced wine and the heavy heat of too many bodies pressed together against the mountain cold. Roman sat at the high table radiating quiet authority, Wren at his side, and for once the evening had been almost bearable. She had begun, foolishly, to relax. Then Cassia rose, a silver goblet lifted in one slender hand, and the whole hall fell silent. "To our king," she said, her voice carrying sweet and clear to every corner. and to his companion. The little pause she set around that word was a small and perfect act of violence. We have heard such fascinating tales since your return, Your Majesty, from the south. In fact, she let her smile widen. A courier arrived only this morning, bearing a letter, sealed by the hand of one Lady Delia Crane. Wren's blood turned to ice in her veins. Even here, even hundreds of miles north, behind walls of mountain stone, her stepmother's reach could still close around her throat. Lady Crane writes out of deep concern for the crown, Cassia went on, savoring the moment, drawing it out. She claims the woman seated beside you is no disgraced heir at all. She claims she is something far worse. A breath. She claims this girl cannot shift, that her wolf withered and died in the cold years, and that she used forbidden herbs, dark and unlawful things, to forge the false scent of a mate where no true bond has ever lived. The hall broke into a low roar of murmurs. Wren felt every eye in that vast room turn and land on her at once, because this was the one accusation that could not be brushed aside. To counterfeit a mate bond with forbidden herbs was a crime answered by exile, and a Luna who could not shift was, in the eyes of the North, a dark omen for the whole pack, a curse waiting to fall. Delia had not needed to ride north at all. She had only needed to plant a single seed in the one court most eager to let it grow. Lies. Roman's voice cracked across the hall like a whip. His fist came down on the heavy oak table, and the wood groaned and split beneath it. Delia Crane is a desperate, scheming liar who will answer for every word of this when my justice reaches her gates. Wren Calloway is my fated mate. The moon itself decreed it, and I will not hear it questioned in my own hall. The force of his anger rolled out across the room, and several wolves dropped their gazes at once. But Thorn rose, slowly, leaning hard on his staff. He did not look cruel. He looked troubled, which was somehow worse. "No one doubts your word, Majesty," the old elder said carefully. "But the law was here before either of us, and it will stand after. A queen of the North must lead the hunt. She must be able to defend her people with tooth and claw. If these rumors are false, then surely the lady has only to prove them so. Let her shift. Let the whole court witness it. And every whisper dies tonight." Every head turned back to Wren. The weight of their expectation pressed down on her like deep black water closing over her head. She could feel her wolf pacing frantically behind its wall, clawing, desperate to rise and silence them all. She could feel exactly how badly the beast wanted out, and she could feel the wall holding firm. She could not shift, not on command, not with 100 cold eyes upon her, and fear coiled tight in her chest. 5 years of dark and starvation had built that cage too well, and no amount of wanting could break it open tonight. Beside her, Roman began to rise, fury pouring off him, ready to tear the whole hall down to its foundations to shield her. And Wren laid her hand on his arm. "My wolf," she said, and she pitched her voice to carry, steady and clear across the silence, "was wounded by people who wanted to break her. I will not stand here and pretend otherwise. It is no secret what was done to me." She lifted her chin. "She is healing, and healing takes the time that it takes. Any wolf in this hall who has never once been wounded is welcome to stand and judge me for it." Silence. It was not a victory. Cassia's thin smile made that plain. But it was not a rout either, and Wren saw Old Thorn lower his eyes a fraction, as if something in her words had found a soft place in him after all. But the seed was in the soil now, and everyone in that hall could feel it beginning to grow. That night, Wren could not sleep. She stood at the tall window of her chambers, wrapped in a fur against the bitter cold, and stared out at the moon hanging fat and silver over the white peaks. The accusation circled her mind like a wolf circling a snare. Cannot shift. Wolf is dead. Forged the bond. And under it, a colder thought. What if some small part of him believed it? What if, behind that high wall, even the king lay awake tonight and wondered? The door opened. She did not turn. She knew his scent before he made a single sound. Cedar, cold, clean steel. That dark undernote beneath it all that her body answered to whether she gave it leave or not. You should be resting, Roman said. So should you. He crossed the room and came to stand beside her at the window. Close. Closer than he had allowed himself since the night of the festival. The bond hummed low between them, warm as a banked coal, and Wren felt the wall around his heart still there, but thinner tonight. Worn. You did not let me defend you, he said quietly. You would have torn your own court apart. They insulted you, in my hall, to my face, and if you had answered with fury, every wolf in the north would have whispered that the king cannot keep his head where the southern girl is concerned. She turned to look up at him. That I am your weakness, Roman. That is precisely what Cassia wants them to believe. I will not be the thing that unmakes you. I would rather they hate me standing on my own feet than pity you for falling at mine. He stared down at her, and in those pale eyes, something tore loose. Do you know, he said very low, what it does to me, to sit at that high table and listen to them speak of you that way, and to keep still? Do you have the faintest idea what my wolf wants to do? Tell me, Wren breathed. He took a step closer. The heat of him reached her through the cold air, through the fur, through everything. It wants to burn it all down to keep you safe, he said. It wants to set my own body between you and every doubt in that room. It has wanted nothing else since the moment the wind shifted at that cursed festival. His jaw worked. I built every wall I knew how to build. I told myself I would never feel a thing I had not chosen. And you walk through them, Wren, every time, as though they were never there at all. Roman, I am so tired, he said, and his voice cracked clean down the middle, of being afraid of you. And then the wall came down, not slowly, all at once, the way a dam breaks when it is held too long against too much water. He reached up and took her face in both his scarred hands, the way he had at the frozen stream, but there was no holding back in him now. His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. His pale eyes searched hers, asking a question he could not say aloud. Wren did not look away. She had spent 5 years learning to flinch first, to drop her gaze, to shrink. She did none of those things now. She lifted her face to his and let him see all of it, the want and the fear and the fierce, unbroken thing beneath them both. And Roman Vale kissed her. It was nothing like she had braced herself for. She had thought it would be like the bond itself, bright, electric, overwhelming, and total. And it was, in part, the current ran through them both the instant his mouth found hers, sweet enough to ache, but beneath the bond, there was something the bond had not put there. The tremble in his hands, the unsteadiness of his breath, the way he kissed her, not like a king claiming his due, but like a man who had been cold for so long he had forgotten the shape of warmth, and had stumbled, at last, in from the dark. Wren's hands rose to his chest. Beneath her palms, his heart was hammering, fast and human and afraid. And the warmth poured into her, into every frozen place, into the hollows that 5 years of dark had carved out of her, and for one long moment she simply let herself have it. Then a single thought slipped through the warmth like a thorn through silk. He feels the bond. She pulled back, gently, but she pulled back, her hands still pressed flat to his chest, her breath ragged. Roman went still. "What is it?" Wren looked up at him, and her amber eyes shone with something that was not quite tears. "How do you know?" she whispered. "Know what? That it is me." Her voice shook. "That it is truly me you want, and not the bond, not the scent, not the thing the moon poured into your blood without ever once asking either of us." She swallowed hard. "You spent your whole life terrified of being ruled by a bond, and I spent mine being told I was nothing but ash. And now I am standing here, and a king is kissing me, and I cannot tell." Her breath broke. "I cannot tell if you are kissing me, or kissing the thing the moon told you to want." The words hung in the cold air between them. Roman stared at her as though she had struck him across the face, because it was his own lifelong fear, turned inside out and handed gently back to him. He had been afraid the bond would force him to love a stranger, and she was afraid the bond was the only reason he could love her at all. Two people, the same wound, from opposite directions. "I do not want to be loved because fate left me on your doorstep," Wren said, and the dignity in her was hard-won and absolute. "I have spent 5 years watching the value other people decided for me. Ash, servant, thief. I will not let even the moon be the one to decide what I am worth to you." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "If you want me, Roman, I need it to be a choice. Yours. Made with your eyes open. Not made for you by your blood." For a long, long moment, the King of the North said nothing at all. She had reached the one place his crown could not guard, the same raw place she had laid open in her own chest. And she had asked him the question neither of them knew how to answer. "I do not know how to part them," he admitted at last, and the honesty of it visibly cost him. "The bond. The choice. I have never once known where one ends and the other begins. Maybe no wolf ever has." "Then we will not pretend to," Wren said softly. "We will not call it love, not yet. Not until we are certain it is ours, and not the moon's." She managed a small, trembling smile. "I would rather build something slow and true than fall fast into something that owns us both." Roman looked at her for a long while, and then, slowly, he nodded. "Slow and true," he echoed, like a vow. He did not kiss her again. He did not reach for her. He simply stood beside her at the window, the two of them watching the moon ride over the white peaks, close but not touching. The bond humming patient and warm in the small space between their hands. And it was, somehow, more intimate than the kiss had been. Two wounded people, refusing to let fate do the work that only trust could earn, choosing, instead, to wait. But far to the south, in a cold manor where a bitter woman sat brooding beside a dying fire, the next blow was already taking shape, because Delia Crane had learned that her letter had reached the north, and she was already counting out the gold it would cost to make certain Wren Calloway never lived to sit upon that throne at all. The council chamber was cold, even with the fire roaring. Wren had learned that about the north. The cold lived in the stone itself. No hearth could ever quite burn it out. She stood near the long table, her hands folded, her spine straight, while the lords of the king's council argued over her future, as if she were a question of trade routes and not a living woman standing in the room. Cassia Frost had done her work well. The letter from the south had spread through the citadel like frost across a pane. By morning, every wolf in the mountain had heard it. The southern girl cannot shift. Her wolf is dead. She bewitched the king with forbidden herbs, and whispers, once they take root in stone, are very hard to kill. The law is the law, Majesty. It was Thorn who spoke. The old elder leaned on his staff at the head of the table, and he did not look as though he relished his own words. I take no pleasure in this. The girl has a quick mind and a steady tongue. In another life, I might have come to like her. Then like her now, Roman said. His voice was flat, dangerous. And let this matter die. I cannot. Thorn shook his white head slowly. Not because I do not wish to, because the North will not let it. You heard the hall. They will not follow a Luna they believe to be a fraud. They will not bare their throats to a queen they think cursed. If we bury this whispering, it will fester, and one day it will split your kingdom down the middle. You know this, my king. You of all wolves know what a divided pack becomes. Roman said nothing, because he did know. He had spent years stitching this fractured kingdom back together after his father had torn it apart. He had bled for it. He had buried friends for it. And the old man was right. And they both hated that he was right. There is a way, Thorn went on, older than either of us. The trial of the silver moon. A stillness fell over the chamber. Wren did not know the name, but she did not need to. She saw the way the other lords went quiet. She saw the color drop, just slightly, from Roman's face, and Roman Vale did not pale at anything. Explain it, she said. Every head turned. A queen who had not yet been crowned, speaking in the council of the North. Cassia's nostrils flared, but Roman answered her, and his voice had gone rough. The challenger enters the deep woods alone, he said, at the rising of the full moon. No escort, no armor, no fire, one blade, and nothing more. She stays until the first light of dawn touches the trees. He stopped. If she walks out at dawn, the moon has judged her worthy, and no wolf in this court may ever question her again. And if she does not walk out, the chamber was silent. Then the woods have given their answer, Thorn said quietly. Wren understood. The whispering woods were no gentle place. She had heard of them already, in the frightened talk of the servants. Dire wolves, frozen ravines, a cold so deep it could stop a heart in its sleep. Rogues who had been cast out for crimes too dark to name. A wolf might survive a night there. Barely. A girl who could not shift. Almost certainly would not. It was not a trial. It was an execution dressed in the robes of the law. No. Roman's voice cracked across the chamber like splitting ice. He rose from his chair, and the force of his alpha command rolled out so hard that two of the younger lords flinched and looked away. "I forbid it," he said. "She will not go. Speak of it again, Thorn, and I will have you tried for treason. I will strip Frost of her lands and send her into the dead country to freeze. I am the king. My word is law in the north, and my word is no." The chamber held its breath. It was the rage of a wolf protecting its mate. Raw. Total. The very thing Ren had feared from the start. And it was, she understood in that moment, exactly the thing that would destroy them both. "Leave us," Ren said. The Lord stared at her. "All of you." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Something in her quiet certainty moved them where shouting would not have. "Leave us. The king and I will speak alone." One by one, they went. Even Thorn, with a long, unreadable look. Even Cassia, her cold eyes burning, robbed of the spectacle she had come to enjoy. The heavy door closed, and Ren turned to face the man she was beginning, against all her own warnings, to love. "You cannot do this," she said softly. "I can do precisely as I please. I am the king." "Yes." She crossed the cold floor toward him. "You are the king. And if you tear down your own law to keep me safe, do you know what you become?" He said nothing. She stopped in front of him and laid her hand flat against his chest, over the heart she had felt hammering the night before. "You become the thing you have feared your whole life," she said. He went very still. "A man ruled by a bond," Ren went on, gentle and merciless. "A king who burns his kingdom for a woman. You told me what that looks like, Roman. You told me by a frozen lake with the firelight on your face." Your father softened. Then he doted. Then the pack starved while he wrote poems. And then there was nothing left of him at all. Her voice dropped. "If you break the law of the North to save me from it, you do not save us. You prove every word of it true. You hand them the divided kingdom they fear, and you become him." She watched the words land. She watched them go in like a blade. "I will not let them take you," Roman said, but the iron had gone out of it. "I cannot. Do you understand? The thought of you alone in those woods, in the dark, with the cold and the rogues. His hands closed into fists. "I have lost things before, Ren. I have buried people I loved. I told myself I would never again care for something I could lose. And now there is you. And the moon asks me to send you into the dark with a single blade and pray." It was the most he had ever given her, and she felt the weight of it, the terrible gift of it, settle on her shoulders. "I know," she whispered. "Then how can you ask me to allow it?" "Because it is not yours to allow." She said it gently, but she said it. "This is the part you cannot do for me, Roman. You cannot fight this battle in my place. If you walk into those woods with me, if you break the law, if you set yourself between me and every doubt forever," she shook her head, "then I will never be their queen. I will only ever be your weakness. The soft southern thing the king cannot bear to lose. They will smile and bow and wait for the day the bond makes you weak enough to ruin." Her amber eyes held his. "I have spent 5 years being someone other people decided I was," she said. "Ash, servant, thief, liar. I am done. If I am to be anything at all, I will be it on my own feet, in my own strength, or not at all. A breath. Let me go into the woods, Roman, not to prove myself to your court. She pressed her hand harder against his heart. To prove it to myself. For a long moment, the most powerful wolf in the north simply looked at her, and then something in his face broke and reformed into something quieter, something that hurt worse than rage. He understood. He hated it. Every part of him howled against it. But he understood that the only way to truly keep her was to let her risk losing herself. That love, real love, the slow and true kind they had promised to build, did not lock the door and stand guard. It opened the door and trusted. If you do not walk out at dawn, he said very low, I will go into those woods myself, and I will not come out without you. Living or not, do you hear me? There is no world I will stand in where you are gone, and I remain. That, Wren said with a small and trembling smile, is the most frightening thing you have ever said to me. Good, he murmured. Then you understand exactly what I am giving you. He turned away from her. He crossed to a heavy chest at the far wall, iron-bound, old. He knelt and opened it, and from within he drew something wrapped in dark cloth. When he unwound it, the firelight caught the blade and threw it back in a long, cold gleam. It was a dagger, perfectly balanced. The hilt wound in dark leather worn smooth by generations of hands. The steel folded through with veins of bright silver and something darker. A metal that drank the light instead of giving it back. This blade is older than this house, Roman said. His voice had thickened. Forged by a master whose name is half a legend now. Folded with pure silver and cold iron. It will bite through the thickest hide of any beast in those woods. It has never once failed the hand that carried it. He turned it, hilt first, and held it out to her. It carried my grandfather through 3 wars, he said. Now it carries you through 1 night. Bring it back to me. Bring yourself back to me. Wren reached out and closed her hand around the worn leather grip. The weight of it was perfect. It settled into her palm as if it had been waiting there. And with it came something she had not felt in 5 long years. Not safety. There was no safety in what lay ahead, but readiness. Thank you, she said quietly. Do not thank me. His jaw was tight. I am sending the only thing I have ever been afraid to lose into the dark with a knife. Thank me at dawn, when you walk back out. The hours that followed were a strange and quiet thing. Mistress Halla came without being asked. She said nothing about trials or laws. She simply helped Wren into the warmest clothing the law would allow. A single layer, no fur lining, nothing that counted as armor, and her blunt fingers moved with an unexpected gentleness. You will keep moving, Halla said gruffly, as she cinched a leather bracer to Wren's forearm. The cold kills the ones who stop. You hear me, girl. You do not stop. You do not sit down to rest. You do not let the warmth fool you when it comes, because when the cold starts to feel warm, that is when it has already won. Wren looked at the hard old face. You have done this, she said softly. Walked in the dark like this. Halla's hands paused. A long time ago, she said. Different woods, different reason. But the cold is the cold, and the dark is the dark, and they do not care whose daughter you are. She pulled the strap tight. I walked out. So can you. There. Done. She stepped back, and for one brief moment, Something almost tender crossed that stony face. She said. And it was, Wren understood, the whole of a blessing. Old Thorn found her at the door before the climb to the tree line. I did not want this, he said. He looked older than he had in the chamber, tired. I want you to know that. The law is the law, but I take no joy in sending a brave woman into the dark. I know, Wren said. If you walk out at dawn, the old elder said, and there was something almost like hope in his rheumy eyes, you will not just silence the court. You will own it. There is no wolf in the north who can argue with the judgment of the moon. He paused. Walk out, girl, for all our sakes. I am too old to watch this kingdom break again. By the time the full moon climbed to the top of the sky, the whole court had gathered at the edge of the whispering woods. They came in their winter silks to watch. The tree line stood before them like a wall of black teeth, twisted pines crowding so close that no moonlight reached the ground beyond the first few feet. The cold had deepened until the snow squeaked underfoot and the breath froze on the air. Cassia Frost stood at the front, a thin and certain smile on her perfect mouth. Roman stood apart, rigid as the stone of his own citadel, his pale eyes fixed on Wren and nothing else. He did not speak. He could not. Everything he wanted to say lived in that one unbroken look. Thorn read the conditions aloud from a worn scroll. The words came slow and heavy in the freezing dark. Alone. One blade. No fire. From the height of the moon until the first light touches the trees. When he finished, he struck his staff once against the frozen earth. May the moon watch over you, Lady Wren, he said. Wren drew the dark cloak tight around her shoulders. She did not look at the court. She did not look at Cassia's waiting smile. She let her eyes find Roman's one last time across the trampled snow, and in that look she gave him everything she could not say. I am not going to prove them wrong. I am going to find out, at last, who I have been all along. Then she turned to face the wall of black trees. The dagger was warm now in her hand, warmed by her own grip, the only warm thing she would carry into the dark. She took a breath of the frozen air, and Wren Calloway stepped into the whispering woods, and the trees closed behind her like a door. The moment the trees closed behind her, the world changed. The sounds of the court vanished. No murmurs, no crackle of the watchfires at the tree line. Just the wind moving through the high branches like something breathing, and the soft, endless hiss of falling snow. Wren stood very still and let her eyes adjust to the dark. It came slowly, shapes resolving out of black. The pale trunks of dead pines, the silver gleam of the moon caught in the ice, the deep blue shadows between the trees where anything at all might be waiting. She gripped the dagger tighter. It was the only warm thing she had. She remembered what Hala had told her. Keep moving. The cold kills the ones who stop. So she moved, one careful step at a time, following the faint sound of running water, the way she had learned as a child in warmer woods, so she would not walk herself in circles until dawn. The cold was a living thing. It pressed in from every side. It crept up through the soles of her boots and into her bones. It found the gaps in the single thin layer the law allowed her, and settled there like a second skin made of ice. Her breath came in white clouds that froze on her lashes. But she kept moving, and as she moved, something strange began to happen. The fear did not leave her, but it stopped being the loudest thing. Out here in the dark, with no court watching and no doubts whispered across a banquet hall, there was only Wren, her breath, her heartbeat, her feet finding the snow, and the wolf pacing somewhere deep behind its wall, awake now, listening, closer to the surface than it had been in 5 long years. For 2 hours, she battled nothing but the cold. And then, the wind shifted. Wren stopped. Her nose twitched. Beneath the sharp, clean scent of pine and frozen earth, there was something else now. Something that did not belong. Leather, oiled steel, the sour tang of unwashed bodies who had been waiting a long time in the cold. And under all of it, faint but unmistakable, the metallic bite of drawn blades. Wolves. But not the wild things of these woods, not dire wolves or rogues driven mad by exile. These were werewolves, holding their human shape, hiding their scent as best they could downwind. They were hunting, and they were hunting her. Well, well. A voice drifted down from the branches above, raspy and amused. The little bird has flown so very far from her cage. 3 shapes dropped from the dark canopy and landed in the deep snow around her. They were big. Their faces were hard and weathered, wrapped in the heavy leathers of men who killed for coin and called it a trade. The one in front had a scar where his left eye should have been, and a grin with no warmth in it at all. He drew a long serrated blade. "Who are you?" Wren said. She kept her voice level. She kept the dagger up. Her heart was slamming against her ribs, but her hand did not shake. "Names are no use to the dead," the scarred man said. "But since you ask so politely," his grin widened. "Lady Delia Crane sends her regards. She paid a small fortune to be certain you never walked out of these woods. Hired the best. That would be us." He spread his arms. "The court is too squeamish to finish you. So she found men who are not." The cold that went through Wren then had nothing to do with the snow. The trial was a trap. Delia had planted the seed of doubt in the north, knowing it would grow into exactly this: the law, the woods, the single blade. She had not needed to break the trial. She had needed only to make it happen, and then fill the dark with paid blades. "She is going to win," a small voice whispered in Wren. "Even now, even from 100 miles away, she is going to win, and they will say the woods took me. And Delia will smile the way she smiled when my father died." "Take her," the scarred man said. The 2 flanking mercenaries lunged. Wren had no chance against them, and she knew it. They were trained. They were strong. They were 3, and she was one girl with a single knife and a wolf locked away where she could not reach it. But 5 years of scrubbing floors had made her quick. She ducked the first blade. It whistled past her ear, close enough to stir her hair. She dropped low and drove the silver dagger up into the thigh of the nearest man, and the blade bit deep, silver searing supernatural flesh. He screamed, a raw animal sound, but the second man was already there. The flat of his sword slammed into her back between the shoulders, and the world went white with pain. She hit the snow hard. The breath left her lungs in a single broken gasp. The dagger flew from her hand and vanished into the dark snow a few feet beyond her reach. Pathetic, the scarred man sneered. He stepped over her, slow, unhurried, and lifted his great serrated blade above his head. A weak, broken stray. They said you were a queen. He laughed. You are not even a wolf. Wren lay in the snow, the cold soaking through her vision blurring at the edges, and she looked up at the rising blade, and in that fractured half-second, time seemed to slow. A memory came. Delia, tearing her mother's silver gown down the center, letting the ruined silk fall in the dust. Another. The iron padlock clicking shut, the dark of the cellar swallowing her whole. Her wolf scratching frantically at the inside of her skull while the drums of the festival beat far away. Another. Cassia Frost lifting a goblet. Her wolf is dead. The whole hall turning to stare. And one more. Roman, crouched in the frozen mud beside a nameless stream, taking her ruined face in his scarred hands. Real strength is not letting them tell you what you are worth. Something stirred in the deepest, darkest vault of her. Not fear, not even hatred. She waited for the hatred, almost reached for it, the easy fuel of all those years of cruelty. But that was not what rose. What rose was something quieter and far more powerful. A single, clear, unshakable truth. I want to live. Not to spite Delia, not to prove the court wrong, not for Roman, though she loved him, not even for the throne. She wanted to live because she finally, after 5 years of being told she was nothing, believed that her life was hers to keep, that the girl in the snow was worth saving, that the wolf inside her was not dead, had never been dead, had only been waiting all this time for the one voice that mattered to call her home. And that voice had never been Delia's, or the court's, or even the king's. It was her own. I am not Ash, Wren thought, with the blade falling toward her. I never was. Come home. And the wall shattered. It did not crack. It did not crumble. It exploded outward from the center of her. 5 years of cages and starvation and dark blowing apart all at once, and through the wreckage of it came the wolf. The change tore through her like lightning. Bone cracked and lengthened, muscle swelled and reshaped, thick midnight fur erupted across her skin in a wave, and the pain of it was enormous and glorious and entirely, completely worth it. The scarred man's blade came down and struck nothing but snow, because the fragile girl was gone. Where she had lain, there rose a wolf such as those woods had not seen in generations. She stood taller than any of the men, taller than any common wolf, a true alpha of an ancient and royal bloodline. Her fur was the black of a moonless sky. Her eyes burned a fierce and luminous amber, lit from within, and they fixed on the man who had called her broken. For one frozen instant, the 3 mercenaries simply stared. Their faces, so cruel a moment before, went slack with raw animal terror. That is not, the second man stammered, backing away. That is no Luna. That is. He did not finish. Wren lunged. She moved faster than they could think. Her jaws closed around the scarred man's sword arm, and the great serrated blade dropped useless into the snow as she bore him down with the weight of 5 years of fury made flesh. It was not a fight. It was a reckoning. The second mercenary swung at her flank, and she turned it aside as if it were a child's toy and sent him sprawling into a drift. The third, the one she had already cut, took one look at the towering creature standing over his leader and made the only wise choice of his miserable life. He ran. He dropped his weapon and fled blindly into the blizzard, screaming, crashing through the dark trees, and his cries faded into the howling wind. The second man scrambled up and followed, half running, half falling, gone. Only the scarred leader remained, pinned beneath her great paws, his one good eye wide with the knowledge of exactly what he had walked into. She could have ended him. Every instinct in her wild new body screamed for it. But even now, even drunk on power and fury and the sheer, overwhelming joy of being whole again, some part of her that was still and would always be Wren Calloway held back. She did not want her new freedom to begin with a killing she did not need. So instead she pinned him harder until he gasped, and with her great teeth she tore the heavy leather pouch from his belt, the one he had been guarding, the one that held his coin, his orders, and the seal of the woman who had paid them. And then she stepped off him and let him go. He scrambled backward through the snow on his hands and knees, found his feet, and fled after the others, his ragged breath swallowed by the storm. 3 killers had crept into these woods to murder a girl they believed broken. 3 of them ran out, alive, chased by a thing they would see behind their eyes for the rest of their days. And Wren let the dark trees take them. Then she lifted her magnificent head to the silver moon hanging above the broken branches, and she howled. It was not a sound of pain. It was not a cry for help. It was a declaration. A voice silenced for 5 long years, finally, gloriously free, rolling out across the frozen valley and the white peaks and the whole sleeping kingdom of the north. It shook the snow from the branches. It echoed off the canyon walls. It went on, a song of survival and rage and joy and homecoming all at once. And miles away, at the edge of the woods, every wolf who heard it felt the hair rise on the back of their neck. At the tree line, the court had waited through the long night. The cold had driven some of them to huddle near the watchfires, but no one had dared to leave. Cassia Frost stood near the front, certain, smug, already composing the words of mock sorrow she would offer when the guards went in to recover the body. Old Thorn leaned on his staff, his face grim, his eyes fixed on the dark. And Roman Vale stood apart from them all, rigid as carved stone, and did not move at all. He had felt everything. The bond had told him things no eye could see. He had felt her fear when the mercenaries surrounded her, and his wolf had nearly torn free of his skin to go to her. Cain and 3 guards had been forced to physically hold him at the line, his command be cursed. He had felt the blow that drove her into the snow, and something in his own chest had buckled with it. And then he had felt something he had no words for. A surge, a breaking, a wave of raw alpha power rolling out through the bond so vast and so sudden that it drove the breath from his lungs and brought him to one knee in the snow. His wolf had gone utterly still inside him, and then it had thrown back its head and answered, a low, keening cry torn from his throat, as that impossible howl rolled out of the woods and washed over the silent court. She shifted, Roman breathed. He was on his feet. His pale eyes blazed. That is impossible, Cassia said, but her voice had lost its certainty. That is a beast of the woods, a dire wolf, nothing more. Silence, Roman said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Look, The first light of dawn was breaking over the eastern peaks. It came slow and gold and pale, touching the tops of the trees, sliding down toward the snow. And as it reached the edge of the whispering woods, the heavy morning mist began to roll out from between the black trunks. And out of that mist, a shape emerged. A gasp went through the gathered court like wind through wheat. Some of them fell to their knees without meaning to, their bodies bowing before their minds understood why. Because pacing out of the shadows came a wolf of staggering size. Midnight black, dusted with frost, terrible and beautiful all at once. Her amber eyes swept across the crowd with a fierce and royal intelligence, and not one wolf among them could meet that gaze and hold it. In her great jaws, she carried a heavy leather pouch, dark with old blood. She walked straight toward the king. She ignored the lords who scrambled out of her path. She ignored Cassia Frost, frozen now, the color drained entirely from her perfect face. She crossed the trampled snow with the slow, unhurried stalk of an apex predator coming home. And when she reached Roman, she stopped. She lowered her great head, and she dropped the blood-stained pouch at his boots. Then, in a single fluid ripple of shifting bone and muscle, the wolf was gone, and Wren Calloway stood before the court in its place. She stood naked in the dawn light, shivering, smeared with blood that was not her own, and she radiated such absolute, unquestionable power that no wolf there dared so much as breathe. Roman moved. He tore the heavy royal mantle from his own shoulders and wrapped it around her, drawing her against his chest. And for one moment, the king of the north buried his face in her dark hair and simply held on, his whole body shaking with a relief too large to hold. "You walked out," he breathed against her ear. "You walked out." "I told you I would," Wren whispered. But she did not let herself be held for long. She drew back. She pulled the mantle tight around herself, and she turned to face the court of the north with eyes that still glowed faintly amber, with the dawn rising at her back. She pointed one bruised finger at the blood-stained pouch lying in the snow. "Inside that pouch," she said, and her voice rang out clear and strong across the frozen clearing, "is a missive bearing the seal of Delia Crane, taken from one of 3 killers she sent into these woods tonight. I let them run. The men do not matter. The seal does." A ripple of shock moved through the gathered lords. "This was no trial," Wren said. "It was a murder, dressed in the robes of your law. Lady Crane hired assassins to make certain I never walked out of these trees. She sought to use the sacred laws of the North to commit treason against your crown." She let the words land. She watched the faces change. She watched the doubt that had followed her since the festival curdle into something else entirely. Old Thorn stepped forward, slow, and bent to lift the pouch from the snow. He broke it open with trembling fingers and drew out the folded missive within, and his old eyes moved over the heavy wax seal. He went pale. "It is true," Thorn said, and his voice shook with fury. "This is the seal of the Southern House. This is an act of war against the crown of the North." The silence shattered. The court erupted, and at the front of it, Lady Cassia Frost shrank slowly backward into the crowd, her perfect face white as the snow beneath her feet, her certainty turned at last to ash. And Wren Calloway stood in the center of it all, wrapped in the king's own mantle, the dawn gold on her face, no longer the girl they had whispered about. She had walked into the dark a servant they believed to be broken. She had walked out a wolf no wolf in the north would ever dare to question again. But more than that, and only she and the king knew it, she had walked in believing the lie that her life belonged to others. And she had walked out at last, knowing it had always only been her own. The court of the north did not whisper anymore. By the time the sun had fully risen over the white peaks, every wolf who had stood at the edge of those woods understood exactly what they had witnessed. A girl they had called a fraud had walked into the dark with a single blade, and a queen had walked out. They knelt now, all of them, in the trampled snow, in their fine winter silks. The proud lords of the north bowed their heads to the woman wrapped in the king's own mantle, and not one of them would ever again dare to question her blood. The doubt was gone. In its place was something far more powerful. Awe. While the court still knelt, Cain returned from the tree line. He had gone into the woods himself at first light, and in his gloved hand he carried the silver dagger, recovered from the snow where it had fallen, the blade unbroken. He offered it to the king. Roman took it, turned it once in the pale light, and then pressed the worn leather grip back into Wren's hand and closed her fingers around it. It came back, he said quietly. So did you. She slid it home at her hip, and it stayed there. Then Roman turned to his commanders, and his voice rolled out across the kneeling court like the first crack of an avalanche. Delia Crane sent assassins into the sacred trial of the North, he said. She raised her hand against my mate, against the crown itself. Ready the vanguard. We ride south, and we will pull her from her stolen house with our own teeth. A roar of agreement went up from the gathered wolves, and Wren put her hand on his arm. Wait, she said. The clearing fell quiet. Roman looked down at her. You cannot mean to let this stand? No. Her amber eyes were steady. She will answer for everything she has done, every cruelty, every lie, the murder of my father, if the truth of it can be found. She will answer for all of it. A pause. But I will be the one to face her, Roman, not your army. Me. This was my battle from the start. Let me finish it on my own feet. He studied her for a long moment, and then, slowly, he nodded, because that was the promise they had made by a frozen lake and a nameless stream and a tall, cold window. Slow and true. He would not fight her battles for her. He would only stand close enough to catch her if she fell. Then we ride together, he said, but the ending is yours. The journey south was nothing like the journey north had been. There were no cold silences now, no walls between them. They rode at the head of the column, side by side, and the bond hummed warm and easy in the space between their horses. Wren had changed. Anyone could see it. She sat straighter. She spoke without dropping her eyes. The wolf was no longer a frantic thing clawing behind a wall. It paced at the surface now, calm and certain, answering when she called and quiet when she asked it to be still. The change came and went as easily as breath. At night she shifted and ran beneath the moon for the sheer joy of it, a great black wolf flowing through the dark trees, free. Roman watched her run one night, his breath fogging in the cold, and the fear he had carried his whole life, the fear of being ruled by a bond, of becoming the father the bond had hollowed out. He turned it over in his mind and found, to his quiet astonishment, that it had grown small. because the woman he loved was not asking him to lose himself in her. She was asking him to stand beside her as his own man. That, he understood at last, was the difference his father had never known. His father had drowned because he had nothing left but the bond. Wren did not want a king who drowned. She wanted one who could swim. The manor of the south rose out of the morning mist, exactly as Wren remembered it. Gray stone, creeping ivy, the high walls she had been born behind and locked away within. It looked smaller than it had in her memory. Everything from childhood does. Delia's forces did not even try to fight. The moment the black and gold banners of the north appeared on the ridge, half the guards laid down their arms. They had served Delia out of fear, not loyalty, and fear is a poor thing to die for. By the time Wren walked through the great doors of her old home, it was already over. She found her stepmother in the great hall. Delia Crane sat in the high chair that had once belonged to Wren's father. She had dressed in her finest, deep crimson velvet, the color of old blood. Her chin was high, but her hands, folded in her lap, were trembling, and the proud mask of her face had cracks running through it that no powder could hide. Beside her stood Sabrina. The girl was weeping, not the loud performing weeping of the festival. This was quiet, hopeless, the weeping of someone watching the only world she had ever known come apart. Wren stopped in the center of the hall. She wore no crown yet. She wore the simple traveling clothes of the road, and the king's mantle around her shoulders, and the wolf in her eyes. And she looked at the woman who had spent 5 years trying to grind her into nothing. "Look at you," Delia said. Her voice was brittle. She was still trying, even now, to wield the old cruelty like a blade gone dull. Dressed in borrowed furs, playing at being a queen. You were Ash, girl. You will always be Ash. Wren did not flinch. That was the thing Delia noticed first. The girl did not flinch. "You sent men to kill me," Wren said quietly. "In the woods. You paid them in gold to make certain I never walked out." "Prove it," Delia spat. "It is already proven." Wren's voice did not rise. "Your seal was on the orders. 3 witnesses fled those woods alive and have already spoken. The North has seen it all." She tilted her head. "You do not need to confess, Delia. You have already lost. I came here for something else." "And what is that?" Delia sneered. "To gloat. To watch me beg. Go on then. Savor it. It is the only victory your kind ever gets." "No," Wren said. "I came to understand." Something flickered across Delia's face. Confusion. She had braced for rage, for vengeance, for an army at her door and a blade at her throat. She had not braced for this. "There is a thing I have wondered," Wren went on, "for 5 years, in the cold and the dark, when there was nothing else to do but wonder." She stepped closer. "How a person becomes what you became. How someone learns to look at a frightened child and see only a thing to be used." Delia's mouth tightened, and for a long moment, the proud, cruel mask held. Then it slipped. "You want to understand," Delia said, and something raw and old crept into her voice. "You, the heir, the favored daughter of a great house. You have no idea what it is to come from nothing." "Then tell me." Delia laughed. It was an ugly, broken sound. "I came from a pack so poor we ate bark in the winters," she said. "A backwater no one cared to name. My mother went hungry, so her children might eat, until one winter she did not wake. My father walked into the woods one cold season and never came back, and no one came looking, because no one looks for the children of the poor." Her hands clenched. I learned young what the world does to a wolf with empty hands. It steps on her. It steps on her, and it calls her dirt, and it never, ever stops. She lifted her chin, and her eyes were bright and hard. "So I swore I would never be dirt again," she said. "I would claw my way up out of the marsh, and I would close my fingers around something safe, and I would never let go, no matter the cost, no matter who I had to step on to do it." Her voice shook. "Your father was warm and rich and safe, and you were in the way. That is all. That is the whole of it. You were simply in the way of a woman who had spent her whole life terrified of falling back into the dark." The hall was silent. Sabrina had stopped weeping. She was staring at her mother as though she had never truly seen her before. And Wren stood very still and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not forgiveness. It was too soon and too large for that. But understanding. She looked at Delia Crane, and she saw, for the first time, not a monster, but a frightened girl who had eaten bark in the winters, and decided the only safety in the world was cruelty. A woman who had been stepped on so badly, so young, that she had built her whole life around being the one who did the stepping. It did not excuse a single thing she had done, but it explained it. And there is power in understanding the shape of a wound, even one that is not your own. Roman stood at the edge of the hall, silent, watching. He had come ready to give the order, to pull this woman from the chair and end the threat she posed forever. His wolf still wanted it. The orders sat ready on his tongue, and he watched his mate stand before the woman who had tormented her and not reach for the blade at her hip. "Here is what I have learned," Wren said at last. "In the dark, in the cold, in the woods, with a knife in my hand and 3 killers around me." She drew a slow breath. "My worth was never yours to decide, Delia. It was never the court's. It was never even his." She did not look back at Roman, but the words were for him too. "It was mine. It was always mine. You spent 5 years trying to take it, and you never could, because it was never yours to take." She stepped back. "And I learned one thing more," she said. "I learned what it costs to become the thing that hurt you. You learned it as a starving child, and you chose cruelty. And look what it made of you." Her voice softened, and somehow that was the most powerful it had been. "I will not make the same choice. I will not become you. I will not let what you did to me decide what I become." She turned to Roman. "She will not die," Wren said. "There has been enough death in this house. Her father vanished into the woods. Mine died on a border she likely arranged. I will not add her body to the count and call it justice." "Then what?" Roman asked quietly. "Exile," Wren said. "Strip her of every title, every coin, every stone of this house, which was never hers. Return it to the line it was stolen from, and send her back to the marshland she clawed her way out of. Let her live out her years with the empty hands she feared so much." She looked at Delia. "Not as a mercy, as a truth. You were always afraid of falling back into the dark. Now you will live in it, and every cold night you will know that the girl you called Ash was the one who let you keep your life." Delia Crane stared at her, and for the first time in all the years Wren had known her, the proud, cruel woman had nothing to say. There were no thanks. Wren did not want any. Delia would never understand the gift she had been given, and that was all right. The gift had never been for Delia. It was for Wren. Because the girl who had been locked in a cellar had just learned that she could hold the power of life and death in her hands, and choose not to become a monster with it. That was the victory, not the throne, not the crown, not even the survival, the choosing. Before they left, something unexpected happened. Sabrina stepped forward. She had washed the paint from her face. Without it, she looked younger and frightened and lost. She stopped before Wren and could not meet her eyes. "I helped her," Sabrina whispered. "All those years. I laughed when I took your rooms. I wore the gowns. I never once." She swallowed. "I do not ask you to forgive me. I only wanted to say it out loud, while there was still a chance to." Wren looked at her stepsister for a long moment. "You were a child raised by a woman who taught you that cruelty was safety," she said. "That is not nothing, but it is not the end of you either, unless you let it be." She paused. "Go with her, if you choose, or go and make a different life than the one she built. The choosing is yours now. It always was, even when she made you forget it." Sabrina's eyes filled with tears. She did not answer, but something in her face shifted, just slightly, the way Wren's own face had shifted once at the edge of a frozen stream when a king told her that her worth was hers, a seed planted in cold ground. It would grow or it would not. That was no longer Wren's to decide. They rode north again as the first true snows of the season began to fall. The land returned to its harsh and lonely beauty, the peaks rising white against a hard blue sky, and Wren found that the cold did not bite the way it once had. The north had stopped being a place that wanted to break her. It had started to become home. On the last night of the journey, they camped beneath a sky so thick with stars, it looked like spilled silver. The guards kept their distance. The fire burned low and warm, and Roman finally answered the question she had asked him at a cold window a lifetime ago. "You asked me once," he said, "how I could know it was you I wanted, and not the bond." He stared into the flames. "I did not have an answer then. I told you I could not part the two." "I remember," Wren said softly. "I have an answer now." He turned to look at her, and his pale eyes were clear, unguarded, the walls all down at last. "The bond made me notice you. I will not pretend otherwise. The scent on the wind, that first night, that was fate. That was the moon." He paused. "But the bond did not make me kneel in the mud and tell you the truth about your own strength. The bond did not make me hand you my grandfather's blade and let you walk into the dark. The bond did not make me stand in that hall today and watch you choose mercy and love you more in that moment than I have ever loved anything in my life." He reached out and took her hand. The bond flared, warm and bright, as it always did, but it was his words that made her breath catch. "Fate brought me to you, Wren," he said, "but everything after, every choice, every day I chose to stay, to open the door, to trust you to fight your own battles. That was not the moon. That was me. I choose you. Not because the bond left me no other path, but because, of all the paths, you are the one I would walk down, even if there were no bond at all." Tears stood in Wren's eyes. I waited a long time to hear that, she whispered. I know. He brought her hand to his lips, the way he had on the very first night, in front of the whole festival. But this time there was no crowd, no crown, no performance. Just a man and a woman, and a fire under the stars. Slow and true, he murmured against her knuckles. We earned it. And when he kissed her then, beneath that silver sky, there was no thorn of doubt in it for either of them. It was not the bond. It was a choice. And that made all the difference in the world. They crowned her in the great hall of the citadel when the deep winter came. The lords of the north filled the room, but they did not watch her the way they once had. There was no cold scrutiny now, no whispers behind silk. They watched her the way wolves watch the rising of a moon they had thought lost. Old Thorn placed the crown upon her head himself, a circle of forged silver set with stones the pale blue of winter ice. His old hands trembled, and when he stepped back, there were tears in his rheumy eyes. I am too old, he said quietly, for her ears alone, to have hoped I would see the north so whole again. Thank you, girl, for walking out of those woods. Mistress Halla stood near the front, her iron face as stern as ever. But when Wren caught her eye, the old matron gave a single sharp nod. Halla said, and from that woman it was a song of praise. Of Lady Cassia Frost there was little to say. She had left the court quietly, of her own accord, before she could be sent. Some said she had gone to her family's holdings in the far hills. No one missed her. The frost, it turned out, melts when the room finally fills with warmth. When the ceremony was done, when the feasting had quieted and the great fires burned low, Wren slipped away from the crowded hall. She climbed the long stair to the high rampart, where the wind came cold and clean off the white peaks. And she stood at the stone wall and looked out over a kingdom that was, impossibly, hers. The snow fell soft and silver in the dark. She thought of the girl who had crouched in a root cellar, listening to distant drums, certain her one chance at a different life was already lost. She thought of the ash on her hands, the torn gown, the voice that had told her, over and over, that she was nothing. That voice was so far away now. It had not won. It never truly could have. She had simply stopped listening, and a lie that no one listens to is only wind, and the wind cannot tell you who you are. She heard him before she felt him. Cedar and cold steel. Roman came to stand beside her at the wall, and he did not speak. He simply rested his hand over hers on the cold stone, and the bond hummed warm between them, and the snow fell, and the kingdom slept. You are quiet, he said at last. I am remembering, Wren said, how small the world used to be. A cellar, a kitchen, a locked door. She turned her face up to the falling snow. And I am thinking that no one gave me any of this. Not you, not the moon, not the crown. A small smile. I walked out of those woods and took it, with my own 2 hands. Yes, Roman said. You did. She looked at him then. This fearsome king who had learned to open the door instead of guarding it, and she felt the last cold corner of herself, the one Delia had carved out long ago, finally fill with warmth. They tried to make me ash, Wren said softly. And what are you now? Roman asked. She looked back out over the white kingdom, the snow on her dark hair like a second crown, her amber eyes bright and certain and utterly free. I am the wolf who walked out of the winter, she said, and no one will ever tell me what I am worth again. The snow fell, the fires burned warm against the dark, and the girl they had once locked in the cold stood high above it all, not because fate had lifted her there, and not because a king had reached down his hand, but because, when the whole world told her she was nothing, she had refused, at last, to believe it. And that is the kind of strength no one can ever take away.